Williams. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. And as I said, we do this as part of our monthly tour, a series of tours. The Arkansas State Fair has been held since 1868 on various sites across the state. By 1906, a group of businessmen in Hot Springs organized the Arkansas State Fair Association and held the first well-documented state fair at Oakland Park in Hot Springs. The Hot Springs Fair was helped in part by the passage of what was known then as the Amos Law. This was named after the lead sponsor, State Senator Amos. This law effectively curtailed horse racing throughout the state. And because of this, they were able to have the state fair at the Oakland Park racetrack, because also part of that law said that you could have horse racing as long as it was part of a county fair. So I think that kind of helped them out some. They got a free fairground, and then they got to hold some horse racing along with it. This law is fascinating. It was actually seen as a retaliation, and they basically said it in the paper. Amos basically came out and said this was a retaliation against the then National Western Jockey Club, who owned a lot of the racetracks around the South, and especially in Arkansas. And they had banned an Arkansas horse breeder by the name of Captain R.R. Rice from competition, and he got very upset about it. So he went to his friends. And then one of his friends, Senator Amos, did pass that law in the state legislature, basically forming the first racing commission in Arkansas. And this commission took over the racetracks, and then through inaction, basically said they couldn't have any horse racing because they didn't approve any horse racing. So the Oakland racetrack was provided as a venue for the state fair for several years free of charge, and as I said, came with that additional bonus of racing still. After a few successful years, and with the repeal of the Amos Law after his death, and the return of horse racing to the state of Arkansas, the Hot Springs Fair faltered due to a lack of funds. By 1915, the state fair was defunct in Hot Springs. A few smaller fairs took place in Little Rock in 1916 and 1917, and one state fair was organized in Jonesboro in 1918 in northeast Arkansas. In 1920, a group of Little Rock businessmen joined together to bring the state fair back to Little Rock, and a new organization was formed that brought the fair to the deaf school grounds, now where the governor's mansion is today. And they held that fair in large tents. In 1925, the fair moved again to Fair Park, where War Memorial Stadium is now, and new buildings were constructed through the 1920s. By 1930, again the state fair was abandoned, as the Depression took its toll and attendance and profits were down. From 31 to 1937, there was no official state fairs in Arkansas. And in 1937, a statewide group of businessmen and agricultural leaders organized a new organization to promote diversified agriculture development in Arkansas, with their main focus being on the promotion of livestock industries in Arkansas. This new group became the Arkansas Livestock Show Association and was headed by well-known oilman of El Dorado, Colonel T.H. Barton. Barton would lead the association board as president from its founding in 1937 until he retired in 1959, just a year before his death. On September 29, 1952, the mostly complete Coliseum, and we'll get into that a little bit later, which he helped in many ways to finance the construction of, was dedicated as the T.H. Coliseum in his honor. Thomas Harry, or T.H. Barton, also known most of his life as Colonel Barton, was born in Texas in 1881. He eventually entered Texas A&M College, but only studied for a year and a half before dropping out due to lack of funds. He enlisted in the U.S. Army and was discharged in 1904 as a corporal, and then worked for several years in the banking and lumber industry in Dallas County, Arkansas. In 1906, he was commissioned as a captain in the Arkansas National Guard. At the outbreak of World War I, he became a captain in the regular army and spent most of the war training cavalry regiments in Texas. He was discharged again in 1919 with the rank of major. He remained in the Army Reserve after his war service until 1936, when he finally retired from service with the rank of colonel, hence his name for most of the rest of his life was Colonel Barton. In 1921, as the poster child for being in the right place at the right time, Barton arrived in El Dorados just days after oil had been discovered in the region. He quickly organized a new natural gas and oil company and sold it for a large profit in 1929. During the same period, he also became a principal stockholder in the struggling Lion Oil Company. And in 1929, he became Lion Oil's president. And soon, Lion Oil was responsible for the discovery of several major new fields in southeast Arkansas, oil fields, or southwest Arkansas, excuse me. By 1937, Lion Oil employed over 3,000 people and sold its products at 2,000 service stations across the South. Lion Oil merged with the Monsanto Chemical Corporation in 1955, and Barton continued to serve on the board of directors of Monsanto until his retirement in 1959. He passed away on December 24th of 1960. In 1938, the Arkansas Livestock Show Association held its first annual state fair and livestock show in North Little Rock on empty land near the intersection of 5th and Smothers, near where the Sherman Park Recreation Center is today. And as of a few years ago, one of the original 1940s show buildings is still visible from the street there. This first fair was poorly attended due to rain, which resulted in nearly $20,000 worth of debt for the association. Barton stepped in and paid the debt so the association could continue planning for the 1940 fair. The next two fairs were also held in North Little Rock, were very successful and featured a rodeo and even brought in celebrities like a young Roy Rogers. Unfortunately, the fair was dealt a huge blow in 1941 when the large rodeo stadium and cattle barns on the fairgrounds were devastated by a fire the night after the fair closed. The loss of the stadium and nearly 100 head of prime cattle was a devastating financial blow to the young organization. Again, they picked up the pieces under the leadership of Colonel Barton and held the 42 fair in North Little Rock on the same land in large tents. In 1943, the fairground was commandeered by the military, and the fair was moved to the fairgrounds in Pine Bluff for a year. During the following 2 years, 44 and 45, the fair was canceled due to the war and various issues with finding a new site for the fair. By 1945, the Livestock Association had found their new location in southwest Little Rock, along Roosevelt Road, and the state legislature had been convinced to provide funding to help with the construction of several purpose-built fair buildings on the new site as a way to promote the livestock industry. In 1946, the first show and fair on the current site was held in a temporary rodeo arena and in large tents. Soon after the close of the 46th fair, new modern show buildings were planned for construction. This included 2 beef cattle and 2 dairy cow buildings, as well as a separate building for the showing of pigs. And the 2 buildings that you walked through when you came up the road here, or you drove through, basically dairy cow, or cattle on one side, dairy cow on the other, those are the original buildings that were built. So those are the buildings from the 40s that were built. They've had alterations over time, but the tile murals and the front entrances are the same. The rodeo was an early major draw for the crowds and the fair, and ticket sales often helped to underpin the livestock shows and the rest of the fair. However, the early rodeos and livestock shows were constantly plagued by rain and general bad weather. Creating a space that could be shielded from the elements was seen as a need for the growing fairgrounds. Also, the memory of the disastrous 1938 rain that almost destroyed the growing fairgrounds and the growing fair before it had a chance to get off the ground was surely a factor in the decision to build what became known as Barton Coliseum. By 1947, money was secured from the state legislature and other investors, and the 6 new buildings were under construction and being built. By showtime in 48, the animal barns were complete, but cement shortages slowed the work on the rodeo arena. And in 49, the outdoor arena, which featured 2 wings of tiered seating and temporary seating fields at either end, was ready for its first fair rodeo. This stadium echoed the larger, just completed War Memorial Stadium in Fair Park, once home to the show fairgrounds. So the seating that you're sitting in is actually the original rodeo stadium. It would have been open air, and it was basically 2 wings, and it didn't have these shorter sides. Those were infilled with kind of bleacher seats at either end. So for the first couple of years, it was just an outdoor arena, seats, and concrete and dirt, and then dirt around the outside as well. Again, rain struck the fair, and the 49 rodeo was delayed at least twice and eventually reduced in scope due to the thick mud throughout the arena. After the 49 fair, construction continued on the next phase of the Coliseum, the roof. By early June of 1950, several of the large curved steel beams were in place for the roof structure under the direction of the Baldwin Construction Company, the parent firm of today's Baldwin and Shell, who served as the general contractor for the project. Progress was halted, however, when on June 7th of 1950, a crane that was being used to lift the large beams in place fell over due to shifting soil beneath its footings and caused major damage to several beams and sections of concrete tier and several rows of the newly installed seats. Luckily, none of the dozen or so workers in the area when it was collapsed were hurt. The only known injury was a worker who ended up being treated for a sprained ankle before returning to work later in the day. This included the crane operator, who actually stayed in his crane while it was falling over so that he could kind of guide it down somewhat to help others escape from injury. And he was perfectly fine, and the newspaper came out and took his picture standing next to the collapsed crane. And we have that picture out on display on one of the boards as well. So he was fine, but he was credited as saving other people's lives as they got out of the way. The crane collapse resulted in delays, and the full aluminum-clad roof, using only Arkansas aluminum, was finished just days before the State Fair Rodeo in 1950 by the local firm of Ketchner and Company. This new roof made the structure the largest clear-span aluminum-roofed building in the United States at its completion. And the 1950 State Rodeo, at the 1950 State Fair Rodeo, then Governor McMath noted during a speech that, quote, "We're going to complete this big structure," end quote. That was all that was quoted in the newspaper, so apparently it was a rousing speech. At this point, the structure still lacked an exterior paved concourse behind the stands. It didn't have the outside walls, and all of the amenities were missing, such as restrooms, air conditioning, heating. It didn't have any of that. It was basically a roof and a rodeo arena. By 1950, the plans were made to complete the exterior brick and tile walls, and the Livestock Association voted to name the building in honor of Colonel Barton for his years of hard work in leading and promoting the association and the livestock show. When dedicated in '52, the arena was noted by local newspapers as being, quote, "the finest arena in the South," end quote, with only 4 arenas in the nation being larger, those in New York, Chicago, St. Louis, and San Francisco. It still lacked some finishing touches, such as the concrete in the concourse area, the catwalks for theatrical performances, air conditioning, and heating. The brick and tile exterior, though, we don't know, was designed by local architecture firm of Erhan, Eichenbaum, and Rausch, architects of Little Rock. And there was a very nice drawing of theirs in the newspaper at the time showing what it would look like when it was completed. The final cost in '52 was set at just over $750,000, with an additional $500,000 being noted as needed to finish the building. By '53, it was noted in local newspaper reports that Colonel Barton had again invested his own money and installed flooring for the arena that would allow basketball games to be played in the building. Barton Coliseum would soon become an important local center for basketball and sports in general, serving as the home court for the Arkansas Little Rock Trojans basketball team, the defunct Arkansas Glacier Cats of the Western Professional Hockey League, and the defunct Arkansas Impact of the Premier Basketball League. It also hosted several Sun Belt Conference men's basketball tournaments throughout the years. Also, one interesting note while researching this, at the time, during the 50s and late 40s, a lot of time when they referred to basketball, they called it the cage game, which was interesting, and I'd never heard that. The reason was because in the 20s and the 30s, basketball was actually played in some places in a cage. There was a net, sometimes a string net or a wire net that was hung around the court, and then they played in that net, and so it became known as the cage game. So they had stories from older players from the 20s and 30s who had said you'd end up at the end of a game with rope burns all down your back because you had been fouled out or been kicked out or pushed out, and you'd end up against the net and have burns from the ropes. So that was gone by the 30s, but in the 50s, newspapermen were still calling it the cage game. So if you ever see that in the newspaper, that's what they're referring to. It took me a second to figure that out, because I'm like, are they having some kind of match game? Like, are they having wrestling in here? Like, what is going on? By 1960, the building was completed, and the final cost was tallied at $1,100,000 from the state funding and $150,000 from Colonel Barton. The building campaign was summed up best by an Arkansas Gazette reporter who stated, quote, "It started with a section of bleachers and then another section. Later, an aluminum canopy was added, supported by naked steel beams around the outside of the bleachers. Just a roof, no walls. In time, the walls were put up, and over the years, a heating and cooling system was installed, the building sealed, and a concrete floor laid, end quote, which is basically the series of steps that it took to complete this building. After nearly a decade of constant use by rodeos, basketball teams, local and state animal shows, and various other events, the Coliseum started a new tradition of hosting headliner concerts throughout the year in the 1960s. In November of 1963, the first large-scale concert not associated with the state fair was held here. It was featured Sam and Dave Review and Dance. Sam and Dave were an African-American R&B duo who were eventually inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and were the originators of the song Soul Man from 1967. If you've ever seen the Blues Brothers on Saturday Night Live, that's Soul Man. They're the ones who wrote that song in conjunction with a couple of others. Barton Coliseum, as the largest indoor event venue in the state, became the place to see big-name bands through the 1970s and 1980s. General admission tickets sometimes were available for as little as $4, and during the 1970s, there were pushes by stadium staff to keep the concerts safe, and new regulations were put in place to limit smoking in the arena and to try to keep people in their seats. The seats thing didn't really work out. In 1999, with the opening of the larger Alltel Arena, also known as the Simmons Bank Arena today, many concerts and sporting events were moved to the new and larger arena across the river in North Little Rock. By 2012, Barton Coliseum had been the venue for over 525 major concerts from bands ranging from Western, rap, R&B, soul, heavy metal, to beach rock. I'm going to list a list of some of the ones that performed here that might be surprising. It's not inclusive, and it does not include those bands that performed during the state fair. So this is just, they came here to do a concert. In no particular order: Jimmy Buffett, Kiss, Loretta Lynn, Kool and the Gang, Tina Turner, Black Sabbath, The Monkees, Bon Jovi, AC/DC, Elton John, Def Leppard, Hall & Oates, Barry Manilow, Judas Priest, Jefferson Starship, Rush, MC Hammer, Garth Brooks, Herman's Hermits, B.B. King, Van Halen, The Beach Boys, Journey, Peter Frampton, Fleetwood Mac, Earth, Wind and Fire, Aerosmith, Elvis, Willie Nelson, Milli Vanilli, Johnny Cash, Metallica, Tom Jones, George Strait, The Eagles, Boyz II Men, Marilyn Manson, Reba McEntire, Amy Grant, Sir Mix-a-Lot, John Denver, James Brown, Grand Funk Railroad, Styx, Merle Haggard, Black Oak, Arkansas, several times, Ike and Tina Turner, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Three Dog Night, Sonny and Cher, the Jackson 5, Ray Charles, ZZ Top, Little Richard, Leonard Skinner, REO Speedwagon, Dolly Parton, the Doobie Brothers, Neil Diamond, and Pearl Jam. And that is not an inclusive list. There are many more from that. And I heard a comment, I skipped a few, I did. In that list, I give full credit to the Old State House Museum. Their staff has done an exhaustive list of the people who did perform here, and that list is available. We have a copy outside for you to look at, but also if you'd like to contact the Old State House Museum, I can get you their contact information for a copy of that list, and it has the dates that they performed as well. So if you think you remember your favorite concert, you can find out exactly what day it was. One famous Arkansas rock groupie known to frequent Barton Coliseum was Sweet Sweet Connie, or Connie Hasme Currente of Little Rock, whose adventures as a groupie during the 1970s was featured in the song We're an American Band by Grand Funk Railroad, who played Barton Coliseum in 1973 and again in 1975. The song was written in July of '73 and featured the line, quote, "Last night in Little Rock put me in a haze. Sweet, sweet Connie doing her act. She had the whole show, and that's a natural fact," end quote. This was in reference to their show in Little Rock in February of 1973. She was later profiled in Cosmopolitan in 1974 after the song rose to #1 on the U.S. charts. She also ended up writing a book in the 1990s, if you want to hear more. It's a long, long story. On October 20th, in 1977, another major event in rock and roll history happened and that was when Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, all members of the band Leonard Skinner, were unfortunately killed in a plane crash in Mississippi. They were on their way to Baton Rouge to perform at Louisiana State University, just days before traveling to Little Rock for a concert at Barton Coliseum on October 23rd of 1977. Leonard Skinner had previously played Barton Coliseum, and they were sure that the concert would be a sellout. The concert was canceled, and many who had purchased early tickets returned them for a refund. In the recent search through Barton Coliseum for historical items, a stash of those original tickets were found, and the Old State House has those in their collection, and they will be featured in the upcoming State Fair exhibit as well, along with many, many other tickets that they found throughout the stadium. As I said, a preview of that exhibit can be seen also at the Old State House Museum right now with the larger exhibit to come. I also want to note that if you do have items of State Fair interest, historical interest about concerts or State Fair, the Old State House Museum is still collecting items for that exhibit. So if you would like to contact one of their staff, let me know and I can get you in contact with them. So they are still collecting items if you have something that you think is just, needs to be in their collection as well. A couple of notes: in the last few years, they have changed over all the lighting in the Barton Coliseum to LED. That's one of their moves recently. And they have updated a few of the features, like the bathrooms and the basketball courts were refurbished. And I also wanted to note that the next big events that they're going to be having here, so they do still have quite large events, is they have the Arkansas Big Buck Classic at the end of January, the Garden Brothers Circus in early February, the Arkansas Flower and Garden Show in late February, and the first Robotics Rock City Regional Competition in early March. Also, as a surprise today, I think you got, as you came in, a postcard. These postcards were actually donated by Mr. Ralph Dottie of Dottie Prints, who's a vintage paper collectible dealer from Little Rock. He found in a collection that he purchased a set of these surplus print run postcards from 1952, so they would have been printed the same year that the stadium was dedicated. And he gave those to us to hand out as a true memento of the occasion, a vintage memento, so definitely thank him for those. This concludes the history presentation for the Coliseum. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Do check out the historic images we have on display. We also have a copy on display of the Arkansas State Fair book that was produced, and that book is for sale at the Old State House Museum as well. It has lots of really great images of the whole history of the fair from the 1860s through today. Also, we are able to walk around the stadium today. They're going to have the concourses open. One thing to definitely check out, and it's something that you probably need to go kind of in one at a time, as we go out the door here and to the right, there's another door. This is what they call the t-shirt room. This is where they held the supplies when bands would come, and that's where their groupies would write their names and the band and the concert and the date on the walls. So there's lots of great band names and groupie names from those bands in that room. So if you do want to check that out, definitely do. I'm going to be down there to kind of point you toward it. There is a ramp going into the room, so do be careful with your step. It's kind of a steep ramp to get down in there. Thank you to the staff at the Arkansas State Fairgrounds and to the Old State House Museum staff, and thank you for coming today.